The wind howls across a frozen field. 14th century, midwinter. Outside, the blizzard devours the night. Inside a hut of earth and straw. Silence. Just breath. No fire. No light. Only warmth drawn from the ground itself and from the bodies huddled close beneath wool and clay. You can almost hear the frost pressing against the walls and the heartbeat of the village beneath it. How did they survive nights like this when the world froze solid at 20 below? What secrets slept inside these walls? Inside their blankets? Inside the way they lived together? The answers were never written in books. They were felt in the dark, in the quiet, in the warmth that refused to die. The north wind never stopped. It clawed at the hills, tore through the fields, and rattled the frozen doors of every medieval home. Yet in one quiet village of northern Europe, there was warmth, not from fire, but from the earth itself. Their houses weren't built on the ground. They were built into it. Thick clay walls, straw mixed deep inside like veins of gold, roofs buried under turf, heavy and green, breathing with the soil. Each home was a half-buried heart pulsing with the warmth of the living. Fire back then was a dangerous luxury. It burned too much wood. It smoked, it choked, it blackened the lungs of those who dared to light it. So they turned instead to mud, to grass, to silence. They learned that damp earth could insulate like stone, that the world itself could be their shelter. They packed walls, too, sometimes 3 feet thick, sealing the wind outside, while the air inside stayed still and heavy, holding body heat from people and livestock. Records from ancient turf homes show a quiet miracle when the night outside dropped to 15 degrees below freezing. Inside, the air stayed around 41 degrees above. No fire, no smoke, just survival. And when the blizzard screamed across the plains, these homes barely shivered. The earth absorbed the storm, then gave back its quiet warmth. It was a pact between human and ground, between frost and breath. They didn't fight nature. They entered it. They lived inside it. Today, we call it passive insulation. Back then, they called it home. When the long winter tightened its grip and the snow piled higher than the door, people in medieval Europe didn't just huddle around a dying fire, they moved closer to life itself. Beneath their feet, it breathed. Warm, alive, covered in fur. In small timber houses, families built their sleeping lofts above the stable. The animals stayed below cows, goats, sheep, sometimes even a horse. To modern ears, it might sound rough or unsanitary, but to them, it was sacred. It was survival. They knew the warmth of a living body never went to waste. Each evening, they climbed a narrow ladder into a loft made of wood and straw suspended just above the animal's stall. Below them, the muffled shuffling of hooves, the slow rhythm of breathing in the dark. Above them, a blanket of sound and heat rising through cracks in the planks. The design was simple, yet brilliant. A wooden floor separated the two spaces filled with layers of dry straw, thick enough to keep out the smell, thin enough to let the warmth pass through. The livestock produced a steady stream of moist air. It rose gently, carrying heat and vapor that softened the chill. That thin film of humidity kept the upper room from drying out, turning cold air into something almost gentle. Measurements from historical reconstructions prove it worked when the night outside fell to about 15 degrees below. Freezing, the loft above stayed around 40 degrees warmer. Warm enough to sleep, warm enough to live. No fire, no fuel, just life. And if you listened carefully in that darkness, you could hear more than warmth. You could hear heartbeat, the quiet pulse of a shared existence. Man and animal side by side, wrapped in breath. They didn't just coexist, they co-survived. Together, they built a single breathing furnace made of trust. Today, architects borrow the same idea in eco-barns and off-grid homes that use animal-assisted heating, a rediscovery of wisdom buried under centuries of noise. Because sometimes, survival isn't about invention, it's about remembering. In the dead of winter, when the ground turned to stone and the air bit like knives, beds were a luxury most peasants could not afford. Wooden frames drew the warmth straight from their bodies, cold thieves disguised as comfort. So the clever ones turned to the earth once again. They dug right into the floor of their huts, shallow pits no higher than a man's knee. Into those hollows they poured straw, chaff husks, anything dry, anything that could trap air. Then they crawled inside, wrapping themselves not in fabric, but in air itself. Because that's the secret they discovered. The warmth wasn't in the straw, it was in the space between it. Every gap, every pocket of still air became a shield against the cold. A natural insulation chamber built not by tools, but by instinct. They lined the pits carefully, husks first for drainage, thick straw above for softness. A layer of linen went on top, just enough to keep the skin from itching. Every few days they replaced the straw, fresh, dry, clean. The old layers went to feed the animals or the fire. Nothing wasted, everything connected. Tests from reconstructed medieval huts show the result. The air inside those straw pits stayed nearly constant, about 40 degrees above freezing, while the room itself dropped far below. A small miracle of physics and survival. No stove, no chimney, no smoke, just the whisper of breathing beneath the floor. They slept close to the earth, and the earth cradled them back. To sleep in the ground was to be part of it, like birds in a nest, like seeds waiting for spring. They didn't escape the cold. They reshaped it. Today, that same principle lives again in modern natural insulation pods and ground sleeping systems, man returning to the wisdom that once saved him. Because warmth doesn't always come from fire, sometimes it comes from understanding. Inside the cold stone walls of a medieval monastery, silence ruled. No crackling fire, no glowing hearth, only breath echoing in the dark. For the monks who prayed through the frost, warmth was not a luxury, it was obedience. They weren't allowed to waste wood or flame, so they turned to fabric, to patience, and to the rhythm of their own bodies. They learned something the world would later rediscover: one thick garment traps sweat, and when the sweat cools, the body freezes. But layers, thin, deliberate layers, create balance, a living system that breathes with you. Closest to the skin came linen smooth and dry, woven from the flax fields that grew near every abbey. It pulled moisture away like a second skin, never letting the chill bite deep. Over it came wool, rough, heavy, dense, with tiny pockets of air. Those pockets trapped warmth while still letting vapor escape. Together, linen and wool formed a kind of breathing armor. Each hour when the bells rang for prayer, the monks adjusted their layers. Add one for midnight vigil, remove one for morning chores. Their clothes weren't just garments, they were instruments tuned to the body's music. It worked. Modern tests on reconstructed monk robes show that when the air outside hovered just above freezing, the temperature beneath those layers stayed steady near 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Dry, stable, alive. No fire, no fuel, no smoke. Their warmth came from understanding how the body speaks, from listening to its rhythm, breath in, breath out, until warmth was no longer external but internal. Centuries later, explorers and soldiers would copy the same method, calling it the layering system. But to those monks, it wasn't invention. It was prayer made physical, a quiet conversation between cloth and flesh. Warmth doesn't always come from fire. Sometimes it comes from faith and knowing your own breath. In the vast, echoing chambers of medieval manors and monasteries, warmth was a luxury measured in breaths. The rooms were grand, but the air was cruel. Stone walls held the cold like memory. Wind slid through every crack, whispering through the dark. No fire could heat a hall that size. So the wise built warmth within warmth, a smaller world inside the cold. They called it the bed canopy. Heavy curtains of wool or linen hung from beams, wrapping the sleeper in a cocoon of fabric. Sometimes 4 sides, sometimes only 3, but always thick enough to stop the draft. Inside the breath of 1 or 2 people was enough to change the air itself. What they created, though they didn't have the words, was a microclimate. A private atmosphere just a few degrees warmer, just enough to turn survival into comfort. Tests on reconstructed canopy beds show that this worked better than any hearth. When the room outside dropped close to freezing, the air within those curtains rose nearly 20 degrees higher only from human breath and trapped heat. 10 degrees, maybe 12, enough to live, enough to sleep. No smoke, no wood, no sound but the soft pulse of breathing. The fabric walls absorbed moisture, releasing it slowly, like the skin of a living thing. It was warmth that felt alive. To sleep inside such a canopy was to step out of the storm and into a smaller, safer world, a world built not by wealth, but by understanding. Today, we carry that same idea into every sleeping bag, every insulated pod that holds our breath against the frost. The canopy became a cocoon. The cocoon became a bag, and the idea endured because the principle never changed. They didn't fight the cold. They shaped it around themselves. A small world inside a larger one. And it was enough. When the frost crept through the walls and the night turned to ice, the poorest families didn't sleep alone. They couldn't. In one small room under a low thatched roof, 6, sometimes 8 people shared a single straw mattress. It wasn't comfort, it was survival. Space was scarce, but warmth was scarcer still. Each breath, each heartbeat added to the invisible pool of heat that kept them alive till morning. They understood something science would name centuries later collective body heat. The closer the bodies, the slower the loss. The rhythm of many beating as one. They layered the bed thick with straw, covered it with coarse wool blankets, and lay close, alternating direction, head to foot, foot to head, to even out the warmth. Parents in the center, children and elders on the edges. A living chain of warmth and breath. Every night, their home became a small furnace, built from flesh and love. When the storm roared outside, the sound of breathing inside was steady, calm, human. It was not elegant, not clean, but it was life. Modern thermal studies show how right they were. When 2 people share a sleeping space, the temperature between them can rise by as much as 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Multiply that by 6 or 7, and the air within that tiny room became a cocoon, warm enough to survive, even when the world outside froze solid. No fire, no stove, just bodies, just trust, just closeness. In the dark, warmth became something more than temperature. It was connection, a silent agreement to share breath, to share life. They didn't huddle because they were poor. They huddled because they were wise. Because survival in its purest form has always been communal. Today we call it shared body heat. But to them it was something simpler, the ancient art of not being alone in the cold. When the kitchen fire dimmed and the coals turned black, the night came sharp and merciless. Peasant homes had no grand hearths, no iron stoves, but they had stones and bricks. They noticed the walls stayed warm long after the flames were gone, as if the earth itself remembered the fire. And from that memory, they learned to survive. Before bed, they placed flat stones or rough bricks near the cooking pit, letting them drink in the day's last heat. Wrapped in wool or linen, they carried them upstairs, one by the feet, one by the belly. A silent ember, no flame, just glow. The warmth spread slowly like breath through straw. Not hot, but steady. Enough to keep frost from biting. Enough to reach dawn. Modern tests confirm it. A brick heated to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit can release gentle warmth for nearly 6 hours. A primitive thermal battery centuries ahead of its time. They didn't have radiators. They had patience. They had stone and understanding. Each night became a quiet ritual, an exchange between fire and earth, between hands and hope. They stored the sun's memory inside the stone and trusted it to last till morning. Today, we call it thermal mass storage. To them, it was simply wisdom born in silence under thatched roofs beside tired hearts. No wires, no noise, just warmth, remembered by stone. Morning comes slow. The blizzard is gone, leaving behind a world of white silence. Frost on the roof, mist in the air. A door creaks open. and pale sunlight spills through the fog. They step out tired, quiet, alive. No fire still burning, no coal, no power lines. Yet they survived. They did it with wisdom, with breath, with each other, by shaping the world instead of fighting it, by trusting warmth that came not from flame, but from the closeness of life itself. Today we have machines that heat our homes but colder hearts inside them. They had no technology, but they remembered how to stay warm together, because winter always returns, not just in the sky, but in us.